The information that he provided to me was that he, at the time I saw him, was 52 years old. He's a designer or an architect, so he spends a good deal of time at a drawing board. He said he had never had significant problems with his back or his neck until a motor vehicle accident that occurred in October 25th, 2002. He said he was struck from behind. He was wearing seat belts. He was did not lose consciousness, but after this accident complained of back pain, leg pain, neck pain, and headache. He'd been seen by Dr. Parsons and had been treated with physical therapy. He was no better, and so he was sent to me for an evaluation. The current complaints in December 2002 were that of back pain, radiation of pain to the right leg, burning sensation down in the right leg, pain in the left hip, neck pain, shoulder pain. He had the difficulty in focusing on close objects with vision. And he said that the pain and headache were so severe he had not been able to work since the time of the accident. He'd been treated with narcotics, hydrocodone, and was unhappy with their pain control, and so was here for me to evaluate him. The examination at that time showed that he did have diminished range of motion of his neck. He had mild spasm in the muscles of his neck. I could see no signs of any neurological deficit with respect to his arms. He had diminished range of motion of his back, and he had spasm in the back. He had diminished pinprick sensation. He had increasing sensation to pain in the right leg compared to the left, and a positive straight leg raising on the right at 60 degrees. And that meant if I lay him in the bed, lifted his leg, and at 60 degrees he had complaints of pain in his back that radiated up into the hip and down the leg. He had no sign of any weakness. He had no sign of any muscle loss. He had no sign of any reflex change. An MRI scan was done, and the MRI scan showed between the fourth and fifth vertebrae there was an area of stenosis, or a bulge in the disc, and some degenerative changes there. And so I thought Mr. Crawford had an injury that was characterized by a muscle and ligament injury of his back, a lumbar stenosis, as well as a neck injury and a post-concussive syndrome. And I asked him to be studied further with an MRI scan of his brain, and also asked him to be seen by Dr. Frank Scott, who is an ophthalmologist, to be sure there was not a significant problem related to his vision. An MRI scan was done on December the 9th of his brain, and this showed no evidence of any structural abnormality in his brain as a result of the accident. Specifically, there was no sign of any hemorrhage. There was no sign of any shear injury, which is an area where you see tearing of the substance of the brain sometimes with a brain injury. He had none of that. And so I recommended that he begin a physical therapy program and continue that. He was seen in the office on January the 6th, then February the 5th, and then seen on March the 5th, 2003. At that time, he was starting to improve with respect to his neck and respect to his head, but was still having significant pain in his back and significant pain down his right leg. The physical therapist had treated him and had noted rather than his improving, they thought he was worsening. And so I recommended that he be studied further with respect to his back with a myelogram. And met him in the office and discussed that study with him on April the 7th, 2003. The myelogram and the post-myelogram CT scan were done on April the 16th and really did not show a lot of difference in the structure of his back than Dr. Parsons' MRI scan. That was he did have evidence of degenerative disc disease between L4 and L5, as well as a mild disc bulge at that area. I thought that was the best explanation for the pain that he was having in his back and the pain down his leg. I told him to go back with the physical therapy and asked the people at Tracy Calkins Physical Therapy to see him, to start treating him with that. I saw him then on May the 19th. At that time, he said that for the first time he really saw improvement in his back complaints. He was seen then again on July the 21st, 2003, and then last seen and then seen again September the 22nd, 2003. At that time, I thought Mr. Crawford had reached maximum medical improvement. I thought he had recovered from the complaints of his neck injury and from his post-concussive syndrome, but he still had significant symptoms with complaints of pain in his back and radiation of pain down the right leg that I thought was a result of his mild spinal stenosis and degenerative disc disease. I told him that I would not recommend any surgical treatment, that I would recommend that he continue the same exercise program that the therapist had shown him how to do. I thought he would continue to require medications, Celebrex, which is an anti-inflammatory agent that has provided help, and that he would still require a narcotic called Darvocet, as well as Ambien, to help him with his complaints of pain and stiffness. I told him again at that time I thought he had reached maximum medical improvement. I have seen him on one occasion since that time, and this was March 22nd of 2004, and there's really not been any change in his examination or his complaints from the visit and from the note of September the 22nd, 2003.
What can you tell the jury about his prognosis for the future and his need for future treatment?
I think he will continue to have complaints of back pain and radiation of pain down his leg. I think he will continue to need to be seen by a physician, either myself or an orthopedist or a general physician, at least on a twice-a-year basis for evaluation of this. I think it's likely that he will require an anti-inflammatory drug such as Celebrex on a permanent basis. It's my hope that as time goes on he will be able to reduce the need for narcotics, Darvocet and the Ambien. I don't anticipate he will need any operation as a result of this, and I think it unlikely that he will require future MRI scans or other studies for this.
Do you believe he has a permanent condition or problem?
I do.
And can you describe to the jury?
As I said, I think that he had a transient injury involving his neck and a post-concussive syndrome. I think he's recovered fully from those, and there's no permanency to those. I do think he has a permanent injury to his back and has the stenosis or the degenerative disc that has become symptomatic as a result of the car crash. I do think that's a permanent injury. I think based on the AMA guidelines, 5th edition, he's entitled to an impairment as a result of that, and that impairment would be that of 5% based on the 5th edition AMA guidelines.
Right. Now, do you have an opinion based on a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether or not the symptoms and complaints that you treated Mr. Crawford for were caused by that motor vehicle accident that he was involved in?
Based on the history that he has provided me in his exam, I do think those complaints were caused by the motor vehicle accident in October 2002.
Now, briefly before we started this deposition, I asked you about some medical bills that Mr. Crawford had incurred and asked you to look at those. Do you recall that?
I do.
What I'd like to do now is just ask you some brief questions about those. The bone and joint clinic where Dr. Parsons practices, if Mr. Crawford had incurred approximately $1,671.75 in medical bills as it relates to his treatment there, do you believe that to be a reasonable and necessary charge?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And you, of course, sent him to the Nashville Eye Clinic, and there was a charge there of $135. Do you believe that was reasonable and necessary, Doctor?
Yes, I do.
And it goes without saying, but your charges, I believe, were $3,542. Those, of course, are reasonable and necessary, correct?
In my opinion, they were.
Okay. Now, there's two separate charges for the Brentwood Rehabilitation and Sports Injury Clinic. We talked about that briefly before the deposition. There's a charge here for $3,930 from McGregor Ewart. You believe that was reasonable and necessary as it relates to the accident?
That's the chiropractor that treated him, and I'm not sure I'm competent at answering whether those charges are reasonable and necessary or not.
Okay. Well, I understand you may not be able to say the reasonableness of the charges, but as far as the necessity for the therapy that he underwent with that particular person, you have an opinion as it relates to that?
I don't know the answer regarding his chiropractic treatment.
Okay.
The charge under there is for physical therapy in the same office, and that therapist was started by Dr. Parson, and those charges would have been reasonable and necessary.
Okay. And you're referring to the $5,990 charge?
From Larry Lawson, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. And then two other charges. One, you referred him to Tracy Calkins for therapy, and that charge was $4,484. Do you believe that was reasonable and necessary?
Yes.
And there were some prescriptions, and without going through each one, but you prescribed him medication, did you not?
The three prescriptions I provided were Celebrex, Darvocet, and Ambien, and those were reasonable and necessary for his treatment.
Okay. Doctor, I believe that's all the questions I have. If you have a resume or CV, I'd like to make that an exhibit, as well as your treatment notes as exhibit number 2. And then the medical bills that we reviewed prior to your deposition, I'd like to make that an exhibit to your deposition as well.
Dr. Howell, I'm Brad Gilmore, and I represent Gray and Kelsey Mitchell in this lawsuit. You testified on your direct examination that Mr. Crawford, on his studies, had a couple of degenerative conditions revealed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
One of those would have been what's called stenosis, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a narrowing.
That's correct.
And is that a narrowing of holes that nerves pass through?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then did he also have a bulging disc?
Yes, he did.
And is it more likely than not that those conditions would have predated the accident that we're here about today?
Yes.
That's why we call them degenerative, because they occur gradually over time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so we can't state you can't state to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, and you're not attempting to state that those particular findings were caused by the accident. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It's just Mr. Crawford's complaints of pain that you're testifying to were caused by the accident.
That's correct.
And those complaints are what we call subjective as opposed to objective. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that means